What's up, everybody? Today we're going to do a deep dive on NFL Classic stacking. There's two main areas where you're going to access the stacking features, the advanced settings and the stack rules. In advanced settings, there's one key checkbox here and it says show advanced stack options. You'll notice before we click on it, the checkbox in the player pool table on the left is the only thing that's telling the optimizer which players are in or out. That means the optimizer is making the decisions on use of players in stacks, i.e., with a quarterback or against a quarterback, or as a one-off, i.e., in a lineup where the team or opposing quarterback is not part of the lineup. If you click on this Show Advanced Stack Options checkbox, you'll see that the stack column has now appeared. This allows you to individually remove or include players in the stacking pool and in the one-off pool, which is what the checkbox does now. So I could take Jonathan Taylor out of stacking, but he'd still be used as a one-off, i.e. not in an Indy KC quarterback lineup. Or I could do the opposite. I could keep him as a stack player, but not use him in a one-off role. That means he's only going to be in a lineup if either the Indy or KC quarterback is also in the lineup. Just like the checkbox that has this bulk delete or include feature where you click on the header, the stacking has the same thing. So if I click this, it's going to remove all the visible players from the stack pool. Click it again, they all come back. This is just a quick way for you to change your stack pool, just like the checkbox. The other column that was made visible to you when you clicked on the Show Advanced Stack Options is the anchor. The anchor is essentially a custom rule shortcut. It is a minimum one of these players when that team's quarterback is used. For example, Jared Goff has Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jahmyr Gibbs rated very highly on this slate near the top of the projections. Let's say that anytime I have Goff in a lineup, I want to make sure the optimizer uses at least one of Brown or Gibbs. If I click on the anchor for both of them, that's now what I've done. So every time Goff is in a lineup, it will use one of these two selected players. If you only choose one anchor for the team, that means 100% of the time when that quarterback is used, it will use that player. This anchor does not apply to an opposing stack, i.e., if I had the New York Giants quarterback in the lineup, it wouldn't force me to use Amon-Ra St. Brown or Jahmyr Gibbs every single time. You could do that, but you'd have to set a custom rule for that. The second place you want to look is the stacking menu, also available in settings. You'll notice there's a status bar here that will show you how many rules you have active for both your primary automatic stacks and your secondary stacks if you choose to use them. Click on the Add View Rules, you'll get this menu. Each time you join a slate, you'll have one default rule as a starting point, and you can optionally add other rules. First, let's walk through what all of the settings do, and then we'll talk about how to manage multiple rules. The min-max team and opposing players is pretty intuitive. This is just saying how many players from the quarterback's team and the opposing team that you want in the lineup. Remember that the team players does include the quarterback, so a 3 in this column means that I have quarterback plus 2 teammates. Opposing is just the number of opposing players. I can optionally force a pass catcher, wide receiver, tight end, or either one with both the team and the opponent. I can optionally limit to a single tight end across both teams or a single running back across both teams. And these last 3 columns are very useful for short slates. This tells the optimizer how much it can use the team or opposing defense, if at all, in stacks. As we know, 2-3 game slates, a lot of times a defense against opposing players, sometimes even against a quarterback, can win a lot of money. Right now, if I have this set to 0, that means that 0 opponents can be used in the lineup when the team defense is in it. So for example, let's take Chicago. I have a 0 here. If Caleb Williams is in this lineup, then and the Chicago Bears defense is in this lineup, then I cannot get any opponent players in it. That will be allowed because I have a 0 set to minimum. If I set this to a 1, for example, that means I always have to have an opponent. This means I'm never going to get the Chicago Bears defense in a Caleb Williams stack because I have not allowed any opponents of that defense. If I do want to allow, say, Caleb Williams, a pass catcher, Bears defense against an opposing player, I would just set this to a 1, and now I will see those lineups show up. The opposing defense versus team quarterback means exactly what it says. If you check this box, you might see Caleb Williams against the opposing defense. Now, this might not sound intuitive, but a lot of times if you get pass heavy teams, especially with a good quarterback that falls behind, you can actually see them get like a pick six or a fumble six, and then the other quarterback has to throw all game because they're losing, and they're both optimal. This last checkbox is for whether or not you want to allow a running back against the team defense. So going back to my earlier example, let's say I do want to allow an opposing player against Caleb Williams and the Bears defense. So I would set this to a 1. Now I can see those lineups. This is going to say when I do get an opponent, do I want it to be just a pass catcher or do I want to allow it to be a running back? This is a good setting depending on whether the opposing team running back is a pass catcher or is kind of game script proof. A couple examples: Derrick Henry, right? Not a big pass catching running back. If Derrick Henry was playing against Chicago here, I probably would not check this box because if the Bears defense is optimal, odds are Derrick Henry did not get 30 carries and 2 touchdowns. Another example would be like, say, Chase Brown on Cincinnati. He is a guy that catches a lot of passes, involved in the game plan, even if they're losing. I might check this box if it was Cincinnati against Chicago, because even if the Bears defense is optimal, that means maybe he's in there playing from behind, catching a lot of short passes and racking up fantasy points. At any time, you can remove a rule you've created with this bin, or to save time, if you want to create multiple rules that are very similar, you can just click this copy and you're going to see a duplicate. You'll notice you can have multiple of the same team with rules. This enables you to set certain percentages of lineups with different settings for a given team. Now let's talk about how to use multiple rules together. The logic that the optimizer uses is as follows. It's first going to satisfy your team specific rules, then it's going to satisfy the all rules, and then it's going to fall back on the default. The percentage is what you might think. It should add up to 100% if you want 100% of your lineups to follow a specific rule. So in this current construct, I have 10% of Chicago spread out across these 2 rules. I then have 25% of this all rule, and I have the rest will follow the default. If you set this to more than 100% total, it's going to ignore some of the settings. It won't necessarily fail, but if you might get lineup combinations that are different than what you think. That's probably why. Another thing to consider is how these exposures work with setting an exposure in the quarterback table or in the player table. If you think about it, setting a minimum exposure on a quarterback is essentially the same as forcing a stack percentage here. So the recommended way to do this is as follows. If you really want specific rules and unique settings for each team stack, you would do it just the way I have shown here. You'd create a rule for each team, you'd set a minimum exposure, you'd set the different settings, and you'd build your lineups. You don't have to set any quarterback exposures if you do it that way. A quicker way that might be good for most users, if you are okay with the default stacking for multiple teams, can just get rid of all of these rules, go to the player table, go to quarterbacks, and then you can just set minimum exposures here, and then you'll get that many percent stack of that team. If you set quarterback exposures and stack team exposures, they could clash with each other. It depends on what you do. If you set Chicago to 10 and the Chicago quarterback in here to 10, you won't notice any problem. However, if you set, say, a bunch of rules in here to 50% and you set quarterbacks to, 5, 10, 15%, you're not going to get the exact quarterback exposures that you asked for. And that's because it's looking at this team stacks and those are kind of clashing with each other. So to recap, it's recommended that you either set quarterback exposures or team percents here, not both. You can do both, but you just have to be careful with it. The last thing we're going to talk about is secondary stacking. Secondary stacking means not a quarterback stack, but rather forcing specific combinations of team and or opposing players in lineups. We'll use two basic examples that are pretty common. The first one is just that you want a secondary stack, meaning a position player against a position player from another game. This makes sense from a correlation perspective. If there's a high scoring game, even if you don't have the quarterback from that game, you can still benefit from the game by playing one player from each side. To do this, first you would pick a game or all. If you set it to a specific game, it's going to only give you, players from that game. If you set it to all, that means it will consider all games and it will give you a secondary stack, but it's going to choose the game, probably based on the optimal player pool that it can. The percent, again, is an absolute for your lineups. So if you have secondary stacking that's set to 100%, you would see a secondary stack in every single lineup. You can actually set multiple secondary stacks and go over 100%. We'll show you that with a second rule. So for this one, let's just say I want, position player versus position player, and I'm kind of good to go right here. I can change this from a 1 to a 2 if I want. I can only pick specific player combinations, but mostly this type of rule will be fine. You can limit to one tight end or one running back if you want. If you want to delete it, obviously click the trash bin. And let's just say I want this in every single lineup, so I'd set this to 100. The other common secondary stack you might see is stacking a same team running back and defense and not playing any players from the opposition. This rule makes sense because if a team is winning by a lot, it would typically run the ball more and the defense might have a lot of opportunities for sacks and interceptions. So let's say I set this to an all, I set this to 100% again, and this time I'm going to go two team players. I'm going to pick running back and defense, and then I'm going to pick 0 players from the opponent. This checkbox doesn't really matter because I'm not using a tight end. So this is saying I want 100% of my lineups to have a running back defense stack from the same team. So if you build this way, you will get 100% of running back defense from a team and then 100% of this one-on-one from a secondary stack. One thing to note, if you build like this, especially if you're using 100% with multiple secondary stacks, make sure you give the optimizer some room to breathe. For example, maybe instead of doing all 3x1 stacks here, maybe I would do, allow 2 or 3. Maybe I would allow 0 or 1 opponent. You could try it with all 3x1, but just recognize that's an awful lot of constraints, and it could lead to not the amount of lineups that you want. But if you build this way, you should mostly get exactly this type of composition. The last point, it's an important one. It's not really a fun one that people like to adhere to. If you're going to set a bunch of different stacking rules, exposures, secondary stacking, it's best to do it a little bit at a time and build your lineups iteratively. A lot of times if you set, say, like 15 different rules and then you build and then you aren't getting the exposures or the number of lineups you want, it's very difficult to try to figure out which rule or which combination of rules or settings are causing you a problem. It's much better to kind of start with a basic build and then slowly layer on your stacking rules. That way, if you get to a point where you suddenly don't get the number of lineups you want or the exposures are out of whack, it's much easier to figure out which one is causing the problem. That's going to do it for this video. I know it was a long one, but hopefully this helps you build better NFL Classic lineups.